Hello and welcome back to the M&E Drop-In. I'm your host Mouj, and today I'm joined by Phil Thompson, who knows a thing or two about today's topic, which is data management and the golden thread. So, hi Phil, first of all, thank you and welcome. How
Pleasure.
are you? Thank you for driving down. I'll let you introduce yourself. Why don't you tell me a bit about your background and how you kind of went into information management and data interoperability?
Thanks, Mouj, and thanks for the opportunity. So I'm here to talk about all things to do with information management. My background is I started in the construction sector some 35 years ago as a tradesman, started as an electrician for a large building services organisation. And I've done a number of roles in that organisation through estimation, engineering, best practice, innovation, a little bit work on the lean aspects of construction. And then latterly I was working on all things information management to do with product data systems. And at the time, this was just prior to the Grenfell tragedy. And I could see that there was a real need to improve information management.
So in your opinion, put simply, let's go back to basics. What exactly is the golden thread?
Well, the golden thread doesn't actually exist. It's not tangible. The golden thread is really about an approach where the industry needs to collaborate and look to get their information aligned so that it can be supported and it's interoperable and it can be passed between the different actors. So things that it's perhaps more important to talk about what the golden thread isn't. So the golden thread is not a technology platform. It's not a solution that can suddenly provide the golden thread. It's about people creating information that is reliable and interoperable.
Just for the audience, obviously this golden thread is legislative as of now because of the Building Safety Act. So it's not really a choice anymore whether you can have it or not. But I think it's just a struggle as of now to think of how everyone across the supply chain is going to, I guess, store this information. So in your opinion, how should M&E contractors manage this data and store it, even though you're saying it's not stored? But
yeah, so again, it is complicated, but the emphasis is on the client to be able to provide evidence of the golden thread of the information within their building. So obviously then there is a line that flows down to the contractor, the subcontractors, the merchants, the manufacturers to provide all the information. So if you go right the way back through that thread, you start with the manufacturer. So if the manufacturer creates their content, which can be used in an open and agnostic and interoperable way, think of it as a baton. They're taking that information and they've created that content supported by a unique identifier that they can then pass to the merchant. The merchant can then use that information, that product data. They can attach the information they may need, for instance, like delivery information, and then they can pass that to the contractor, who can then use the same information. And there's minimal changes being made to it, and it ultimately all refers back to the unique identifier.
So speaking of this unique identifier, explain what that is. I'm guessing it's kind of like a barcode in products in the construction industry.
You're absolutely right. So the unique identifier, and this is a passion of mine, is that I believe the industry needs to get behind the adoption of a unique identifier. Okay. Now, principally, there are already unique identifiers in other sectors that are used, such as retail and pharmaceutical. Yeah. And one of the largest and most well-established is the GS1 Global Standards 1. Now, they're an organisation that offers barcodes and the unique identifiers that sit behind those to organisations. So organisations would typically purchase a batch of codes and they would allocate them against their products, and that ultimately can be used as the unique identifier, and that can be converted into a barcode, which many people are familiar with if they go shopping.
So in the context of not just M&E but the construction industry, can you kind of just illustrate how this would work across, like from the beginning stages of a building to the end of a project, I guess?
Well, as you can imagine, it's complicated.
Yeah.
Trying to fit it into just one phrase is quite complex. But ultimately, the emphasis would be on the manufacturer to align with the standards that are provided by GS1, and then they would have a batch of codes which would allocate against their products. Once the codes are allocated against those items, and then and it's important to recognise as well that there would be codes depending on the quantities. So a single item, a box of 10, a pallet, etc., would have different codes because they all help with the management of the single unique identifiers, SKUs. That information then can be passed, can be used in both a digital manner, so it can be put on people's websites, transactional information, invoices, goods received, etc., and at the same time on the physical product. So what it's doing is supporting the golden thread in terms of the information management, but also it helps the contractor to actually carry out their activities and manage their day-to-day activities when they receive goods on site.
Okay, amazing. Thank you, Phil. So can you tell me why you think this is important, not just from a safety point of view and obviously legislative point of view, but also how it can help make projects flow more smoothly because you have all the information needed at any given point?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. So again, referring back to the adoption of the unique identifier, what it means is that all the information that is attached to a product, so all of the attributes for that product, any certification, declaration of conformity, etc. All of that relates to that product via the unique identifier. So when the manufacturer passes on the information, the baton, to the next person in the supply chain, the merchant, for example, or the contractor, then all they need to provide is the unique identifier, the number which references their product uniquely, and then the rest of the information can be accessed. And that might be accessed via manufacturers' websites, it might be accessed through specification, it might be through some other platform that the merchants decide to use, but ultimately it all becomes a common language because of the interoperability of a unique identifier.
And how likely do you think it will be that people will start using this unique identifier, because it's not really mentioned anywhere in the legislation or anything? So how do you think people will take to that idea in the industry?
I think quite well. I think that they'll take to it. I think people don't realise that they're already using the codes. There are many products now, thousands of products in the construction sector which already have a unique identifier. Typically, the GS1 GTIN, which is the Global Trade ID number, that is already on the packaging of a lot of products, especially where they overlap into the retail environment. So they're already being offered, if you like, to the construction sector. The problem is that they're not really being used. They're not really being used to drive the transactional process and then support the golden thread. They're just kind of there at the beginning. Somebody has decided to adopt them, maybe because they were selling into retail, but they haven't really exploited the use of them into the actual construction sector.
Do you have any examples of other industries that are actually using this system already, and how the construction industry can learn from them?
We do, yeah. There's plenty of examples out there. Everybody would go into supermarkets and use the scanning technology. I know that's quite frustrating for a lot of people these days, but ultimately the technology behind that is driven through the adoption of a unique identifier, the GTIN. But there are other industries as well that have adopted it. And again, all this information is available on the Global Standards 1 website. But as an example, you've got pharmaceutical, they use it, healthcare, they use it, and also construction in other parts of the world as well. And again, there's evidence of other countries that have started to use the adoption of the unique identifier to drive product information. Yeah,
so I suppose it makes sense for us to kind of jump on the bandwagon.
It does.
Yeah. So something else we're also seeing more of in the industry is product standardization. And how do you think this will have an impact on product information?
Yeah, it will have a significant impact. If you think about products within the industry that I've been working in, which is the building services, MEP or M&E, there's a lot of products which are standard already. So I know that there are products which Midfix already make available, which is bracket systems. they're typically referred to as channel systems, and they do have an element of compatibility.
Yeah.
And there's been a big drive in the industry over a number of years to drive standardization of adoption of a particular brand to make sure that you're installing a system, which has been a positive change. But typically those products are interchangeable. Now that might be seen as an Achilles heel of the product, that it is interchangeable, but also the fact that it is a standard product means that it works together.
Yeah.
And there are other products as well. It's simple products. If you think of conduit, it's 20 mil and it has a thread, so the boxes and the components fit together. You can buy different brands. People do mix and match them, and you can install a system. But yet there are many products, conversely, within the building services industry, which are not standard. So if you look at trunking and trace systems, they're quite often unique to a particular manufacturer, so they don't have that level of compatibility. So that then drives the need for more products, more components, more systems, more product codes, more information.
I see. Okay, makes sense. So something we talk about often is digital transformation and the use of digital platforms. And some people are claiming now that they have kind of like a one platform solution for this golden thread. What would you say to that?
I'd say it doesn't exist.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, you're right. There's a lot of emphasis on digital transformation. A lot of organisations now selling themselves and having roles within those organisations to drive that digital transformation. But there's still a lot to be done, and there's a lot of confusion out there. So if you look at the basics, for instance, digitise and digitalise are very different, but a lot of organisations get to digitise information. So that may mean that they've created content, they've converted from analogue, so things being in paper format, to being within a system accessible via a PC. That may tick the digitised box, but if it's not interoperable, if it's not machine readable, then it's not digitalised. Okay. So a good example, maybe they create a content in a PDF and they send that out as a downloadable file from their website as technical data. But if that technical data isn't machine readable, then it's not, although it's digitized, it's not digital. So there is a lot of ambiguity around that, and businesses need to get up to speed.
That's a good way of explaining it. Thank you. A lot of M&E contractors do use PDFs. That's kind of just the normal way of sending documents. So can you just explain why that isn't useful? I
can. So yeah, typically it's not useful because a PDF or portable document format isn't always machine readable. If it's been created in the right format, then it can be machine readable, but typically it isn't. So if that's then passed to a contractor or a merchant, obviously that has to be handled. Ultimately, it's going to come down to a human to read that information or to extract the information they want from it. If that information was digitalized, then that could be imported into a system. So, for instance, as a merchant, they could receive information from a manufacturer for technical data or some attributes, and then they could import that into their system. If it was in a CSV file, for instance, that would make it much more easily accessible.
Thanks, Phil. You have a way of explaining things very clearly to someone who doesn't know much about this topic. Okay, so in terms of the actual information within the golden thread, and specifically pertaining to M&E contractors, what do you think is the information or the data that's necessary and what isn't? What should be included?
Okay, so what should be included is dependent on the product, the type of application, the type of building, and also who's going to access that information, which particular end user, whether it's somebody looking to replace the product or maintain it. But typically, making all of them information available from the manufacturer data or underneath the unit you can identify it is the key to this. And that information, again, has to be interoperable so that it can be passed, as we spoke earlier about, like a baton, and it's passed to the next person within the supply chain. Now, some of them may choose to just access basic information. Say, for instance, the product has failed, they'll need to replace it. So they could look at that particular item, go back to the manufacturer, say, I need a replacement. And if that's been superseded or it's now out of stock, there may be an equivalent replacement or a product that can be substituted with, so that would be adequate. Okay. If the product needs to be maintained, maybe it's got some sort of filters or a lamp that's failed or something like that, then again, having the specific information related to the product, But again, always coming back to that unique identifier, so you can always be assured that it's the product that you're referring to. I suppose it's like if you were going online searching for a product on Google and you were making a comparison, you would want to always know that that comparison was referring back to the product that you wanted to identify, not some substitution alternative that Google or some sponsored link had decided to promote.
Okay, so clearly this having a unique identifier on each product seems kind of essential to maintain this information throughout the whole life cycle. But telling the industry, everyone to do this one thing seems a bit difficult when it's not a legislative requirement. So how, in your opinion, do you think we can kind of collectively adopt that?
I think we can only do that if people start to collaborate and see almost like working towards the greater good. Because if you look at the examples across other sectors where typically GS1 have been successful in the adoption, retail, etc., it's an organisation like GS1 has no skin in the game. They don't say you must use our standards. They just create a structure that can be used. It's up to the sector to collaborate and to work together. So what happened in retail is, decades ago, is that those organisations, your large retailers, they came together because they saw they had a need in order to adopt a system that would allow digital information, scanning of products, etc. at point of sale. But they needed a common language. They needed to be able to work together. So that's what they did. And unfortunately, what construction is yet to do is to reach that tipping point. And if you look back at the Latham-Egan reports now, again 25, 26 years ago, and they referenced the fact that the industry was still fragmented, and until we sort of put that aside and start working together for that greater good, then the change will be slow.
It's funny you say that from 25 years ago, but only the Hackett report from 5 years ago said the same thing about the fragmented approach to product information.
Absolutely.
So I know part of what you do at IM2 is identifying bottlenecks to kind of smooth information management, right?
Yes.
So when it comes to the golden thread, what do you think are the challenges that we face?
Amongst others, the biggest challenge is the culture and behaviour of the way people manage information. So their approach to handling information, day-to-day content that they're creating. So this is again driven from the information they receive from the manufacturer, because that doesn't have any uniqueness about it. They may import that into their local systems. They may create their own part numbers. They may utilise that in a particular way, which is then locked into their system, and then exporting that or passing it to the next person within the supply chain becomes a challenge. So the behaviour, the culture that organisations have at the moment has to change. If they're doing things which potentially will undermine the adoption of the golden thread, then they need to stop doing that and unravel that and go back to the basics of using information which is interoperable.
What other challenges are there?
Other challenges will be, again, which particular data sets they're using. It may well be that they're using localized content. A lot of merchants typically would create their own content because it's they want to protect their information because there's a price element to it. There's a commercial aspect. So they want to make sure that that's well managed. So they might not be using a particular database. Some people are using industry databases through API connections. And others are doing their own thing. So again, we've got this kind of almost like the Wild West of product information, where you've got duplicates and triplicates and misinformation, things that don't match, etc.
So you mentioned lean manufacturing earlier, which obviously is all about efficiency. So from that point of view, how would information management improve that or help that?
Yeah, it definitely can massively, because lean is all about identifying what we call value add, which are the things that really businesses want to be doing, because that's going to make them more efficient and more profitable. And then identifying what we call non-value add. So those are the things that we perhaps need to do all the time. They're processes that we need to carry out, but they're not really ultimately going to make you efficient. So it's about reducing those, but you typically can't get rid of them. And then there's also identifying waste as well. So waste is as the word suggests, it shouldn't exist within an organization. So if you take the lean approach, which comes from manufacturing, etc., and you apply that to information management, looking at the flow of information within an organization, looking at how they're using it, how individuals are using it, are they using the right data sets, are they creating silos, do they have duplicates, are they rekeying information? That's a really good example. When I worked for a large building services organization, we saw an evolution of information management in terms of processing purchase orders or requisitions.
Yeah.
So typically on a construction environment, many years ago, you would have had people sending content in via post. Then it would have been evolved to a fax machine, and then it was direct inputting into perhaps into an ERP system. And that evolution took time, and within each step as well, there was lots of inefficiencies, so lots of rekeying. So it's typically, say for instance, many years ago when information or requisitions were received, they could have been via post, they could have been via fax, they would have been handwritten. That information would have had to be rekeyed into a procurement system in order to place an order. So that whole rekeying would have led to transcription errors, for people not being able to interpret what an engineer wanted. There was a lot of guesswork, and again, there was no real emphasis on the quality. What was the product that you wanted, or was it, like for like, was it an equivalent? So that whole process really was riddled with waste and non-value add. And even latterly, when we've moved to systems where people are perhaps emailing in content, again, this is the whole conversation around digitize and digital.
Yes.
If somebody is sending in a keyed email saying, here's the list of my materials that I need to deliver the job, but then that information is being rekeyed into some ERP system, then that is inefficient. The user should key the information in either directly or it should be done through some sort of import routine, so that you pretty much eliminate those transcription errors. So yeah, lean can help a lot.
Okay. So it's interesting you mentioned the whole rekeying and incorrectly keying something in the context of building safety. Someone could incorrectly put in the wrong key or code for a product, and then in turn they've become a specifier of a different product, but it could be like the wrong product to use in that context. And at the same time, they've not followed the change management procedure, and therefore there's a lot of risk involved.
Okay, yeah. So in summary, in terms of the integrity of the information is really the key, because the information that's been passed along, if you can imagine, you're already creating the golden thread. When you start, the manufacturer starts the transactional process of sending information to the merchant, or the merchant calls off stock from the manufacturer. This is all part of the movement of data along the golden thread, and attached to that information, again, is all of the attribute data that may be carried as part of the safety critical content, etc. But in order for that to work, there has to be the integrity of the information has to be upheld, so the information is moved along, and make sure that, again, to come back to keying errors, we eliminate those by using digitalized information, which is interoperable. So again, the adoption of a unique identifier would allow the support of that. Now, from a user perspective, at the front end, they don't necessarily need to know the codes, or even need to they don't need to search with the unique identifier or the GTIN, the number below the barcode. They would just typically pick the product, but the system would have embedded behind it that unique identifier. That's the information that the machine would pass on to the next person. So say, for instance, let's assume it's a supervisor on site, and they need to procure some drop-in anchors, some which are used for fixing into a concrete substrate. Yeah. They would need to say, right, I want a particular type of branded drop-in anchor that has a safety rating and is specified by the client. They need to then pass that information with their quantity along to the person who's going to place the order. Might be somebody in a procurement department, or it might go direct to the merchant as a call-off. But unless that information is unambiguous and all of the potential failure points have been eliminated through a lean approach, then you always are going to open yourself up to error.
So obviously it's clear that it's important that the information that's inputted is accurate. How does that kind of lean into the whole competence requirements? Because in theory, products I guess it's easy to give them a unique identifier. But when it comes to the person's competence, how can we identify that person's competence in the context of the golden thread?
Okay, yeah, great question. So there are mechanisms within the GS1 standards to identify users or competency against competency matrix. So this is where the adoption of the GS1 standards would pay dividends, because not only can you identify the what, as in the product, but you can identify the who as well. So if there's a competency requirement for somebody who's going to place demand on a system, do some input in terms of keystrokes, etc., to make sure that there's some accountability against the items that are being requisitioned or procured. So that those standards could be used, and to take that one step further as well, once the products are installed in the construction environment, they can also then use the location ID, which is again under the GS1 standards, which is a GLN. So you've got the whole basis covered really, because you've got the product, the who's installing, and the where it is, and all of this information again can be hung onto the golden thread.
So what do you think, as of now, the competence levels are in the industry when it comes to information management?
Again, it's varied. There's a lot of people out there. There is a lot of technical specialists that are more focused on the platforms. That they may have good skill sets, but I think if you get down to the like the lower echelons, the people that need to just manage the information on a day-to-day basis, create content and validate information through the transactional process, I think that there are definitely improvements to be done there. There's definitely a cultural shift that's required. Even something as simple as sharing information with colleagues, emailing items, etc. There are lots of systems and mechanisms out there to make it easy. For instance, there's like kind of SharePoint type solutions or cloud-based platforms, but sometimes they're not used. People just default to emailing content to move information around. So if you look at just again the culture, the way people approach information management, regardless of whether it's relating to a product, there's still a lot of work to be done.
Thanks, Phil. Something else I wanted to bring up was BIM, and first of all, what your opinion of it is, and whether you think it will be a mandatory player in the recording and the maintaining of this golden thread data.
Okay, again, another great question. BIM, I think it's been bittersweet for the construction industry, because in the early days there was an expectation that BIM was going to solve all our problems and was going to drive this digital adoption. But arguably elements of it have definitely failed, because what it's done is taken the focus away from just pure good information management and tried to drive us down this route of modelling data and too much information related to geometry. And I think a lot of manufacturers have perhaps come a little bit disenfranchised with it, because they've spent money on getting BIM data readily available for contractors, etc., and it's just not really been used. When I worked for a large building services contractor, there was a lot of BIM data provided which would just overload the models. There was too much information that was just superfluous, so it might well be that it's a wiring accessory, for instance, and they might have information that relates to, say, radius of corners on the product. And that's just not really required. But again, there is more of an emphasis now to rename BIM into better information management, which in my view is a much better use of the acronym to drive the whole sector towards getting better at providing information that supports the golden thread.
Yeah, it's almost defeating the purpose when you're putting too much information in rather than just keeping it to what's relevant.
Yeah, there are a number of contractors that have got experience of just not been able to open models on site because the BIM data was just too heavy. But again, coming back to the adoption of a unique identifier, if within the model the only piece of information that's required is an instance of the item, could be a bracket, could be a wiring accessory, could be a luminaire, isolator, and it's just got the unique identifier. And from that identifier, then there's a link back to a proprietary database that then has got all the related information to it. So it might be technical information, it might be commercial information. It's whatever the user needs, but it's always going to be back to the product.
Well, it seems like this unique identifier is going to solve a lot of these problems. So let's hope more people start to adopt it in the industry. What about digital tools? Do you think we'll be using more digital tools to actually capture the data, or just to store and manage it? If you know what, yeah.
Yeah, I do. So
Yeah.
again, so I was just thinking there, because digital tools, again, quite often the phrase digital tools refers to software platforms, etc., and
Yeah.
things that can manipulate data. But if you're referring to physical tools,
Yes.
which are then connected, absolutely, they've definitely got their place. So good examples of that would be, and there are already tools out there which allow capture of digital information, but I don't think that they're doing it in a way that the information's interoperable. Again, it's platform specific. So if you buy a particular, say, a tester, electrical tester, you can capture the test results within that given machine, and they can be, again, downloadable. But if they're not in a format which then can be attached to information, then they become quite, again, restrictive, quite siloed. Other tools as well may be available, such as pull testers, crimp tools for pipe systems, again, that just evidence that there's been the correct crimp. Again, it's about the integrity of the installation, and all that information then relates back to the product, the installation, and the golden thread.
Thank you, Phil. Okay, well, one question that I always like to end the podcast episodes with is, if you could change one thing in the industry, what would it be? Yes, you only get one choice.
Only one choice, okay. So what I would do is I would mandate organisations to stop doing the things that they do now, which are impeding the sort of transition to that kind of digital transformation, because it's not sometimes the lack of progress in the things that people do as they start to move forward, but it's the fact that they stagnate in carrying on what they're doing. Or they do both. So they'll have new processes and new systems in place, but they'll have old things going on as well, and that's the old thing that's holding back the progression. So when you talk about, we talked a lot about unique identifiers, which, as you've identified yourself, makes a lot of sense.
Yes.
But yet people are still using old codes. So if they continue to do that, then how will the new codes ever become the primary?
Well, thank you very much, Phil. I've learned so much on this episode, and you've been a wonderful guest, and you're welcome back anytime. This episode will be up on Spotify and YouTube if you'd like to give it a listen when you're done. And thank you to everyone who listened and watched. Tune into our other episodes. We have a few up on our page, and stay tuned for future episodes. Thank you.